Well, as we start out this morning, I want to mention that Emmett and Dolores' son, many of you may know, are missionaries in Ukraine. And right now it's a very dark time in Ukraine. The good news is they were able to get out of the country safely, but they had to leave absolutely everything behind. They're unsure of exactly what will happen now. They're trying to get a flight here in the United States, and we would appreciate if it continues to update us through our email on their status, but it's a very pressing prayer need. And I also wanted to take a moment and thank all of the people that work behind the scenes to make this service happen, or even the musicians and the singers. And if you want to be part of that, you can. But the men who come and set up the communion and the offering, there are a lot of people, the teachers, the Sunday school teachers, a lot of people that work to make this church operate, and I'm so grateful for each one of them. But thank you for being here. And today, the 10 Commandments. And the fifth commandment that we're going to talk about today is actually a commandment that is directed at the family, the individual families. The first several commandments were all concerning your relationship with God. But the rest of the commandments, the majority of the commandments are talking about your relationship with other people, because that can be a very, very difficult thing. Relationships are tough, are they not? Anybody disagree? Relationships are just really, really hard. People, I always tell my wife, if people would just do what I tell them to do, the commandments talk about several things. It's why when Jesus was asked by one of the religious leaders, one of the Pharisees came to Jesus and he said, "What is the most important commandment?" And there were a lot more than just the 10 that we're going over here in this series. But Jesus summed it all up. Actually, he summed up the entire Old Testament. He said, I'm summing up the entire law and all of the things ever said by the prophets with one short little statement. It's kind of like the cliff notes of the Old Testament and the law. And Jesus said this: love God and love people. Everything else is cream cheese. I mean, he didn't say that, but everything else will work its way out. That's exactly what he said. If you can love God and you can love people, and that's what these commandments are all about. He went on to say that if we get those things right, we'll be on track. Everything else will take care of itself. And having said that, though, it is my personal belief, having been one, that being a parent, raising children is the most important job in the world. I think it's the most important thing you will ever do. If you're a parent, raising your child is the most, I don't care what you go on to do with your career or life, raising a child is the most important job in the world. It's a tough job. I don't know what I'm saying, but the traditional family, what we call the traditional nuclear family, the way that God set it up, which is a mother and a father and children, that kind of family, without question, is the building block of our society. And understand, this is not just my Christian minister perspective here. In fact, it is a conclusion come to by modern sociologists and economic experts from all over the world. Our modern day preoccupation with kind of this new definition of what a family is and what a family stuff, but it has eroded not only our sociological strength as a nation, but also our economic viability. And the fundamental significance of the traditional family unit, all of the hard data clearly demonstrate that it is undeniable that is so important in today's world. And the longer we pander or tolerate these ideas, the more our country, I believe, will descend into anarchy. And you don't have to take my word for it. I mean, you say, well, you're a minister, Robert, of course you're going to say that. But a few years ago, drawing on modern data, governmental data, guys, Robert Lehman and William Bradford Wilcox, they published a wonderful article, and I can give you the link to it if you'd like, in a magazine called The Economist. And they talked about the fundamental role of the nuclear family and what that role plays in society in general. And they summarized it like this: all of the latest evidence confirms that the institution of traditional marriage and family is a key to productive adulthood and the cornerstone of a stable family and the basic unit of a healthy community. It affects go well beyond just that couple, just that family. It shapes all participation to economic equality, to the effectiveness of our educational system. They conclude, children raised by a mother and a father, married parents, have better odds of succeeding in school, of excelling at work, and building a stable relationship of their own. And they go on to say, it's just a fact. It has for thousands of years. It has been the bedrock of all societies. And that's why I say that the traditional nuclear family, the way that God set it up, father, mother, children, that is the building block of civilization. The fifth commandment in Exodus chapter 20, verse 12 reads like this: Lord your God is giving you. Now, I think a lot of people have a couple of problems with this particular commandment. For one, it seems like this commandment is directed mostly at children. It's talking about children and parents, and most of us are grown-ups. So right off the bat, we're like, well, is this talking to me? And number two, it seems to describe a family situation that sadly some people never experienced. Now, a mother and a father, an intact family. The last one is the kicker. How do you obey this commandment if you come from a broken home? How do you obey this commandment if you had abusive parents? Or you were adopted, or you don't even know who your parents were, you don't get along with your parents. If your parents have passed away, I mean, there's so many issues you could find. Like, how do people in my situation obey this commandment? There are difficult questions to reflect on, and they actually bring up a lot of pain, because a lot of us carry that kind of personal pain. On one level, the fifth commandment appears to apply mostly to families that we used to watch on TV, on Leave It to Beaver or The Waltons. Some of you guys are going, what's that? Google it. You'll see. I mean, some of us remember those shows, right? They showed this family and how well how they worked things out. But the point is, it doesn't really seem to take into account how messy our culture has become, how messy and even dysfunctional our families have become in today's modern age. And yet, I can tell you this commandment stands. I don't think it's been repealed or amended to reflect our world in 2022. This is still a commandment. And as we jump into our discussion, I want to begin with two crucial observations, and that's this. Since this commandment comes from God, there must be a way. This commandment comes from God. There must be a way for us to actually obey it. No matter how painful or uncomfortable it makes us feel at times, there's got to be a way to obey it. And since God has our best interest in mind, I can guarantee you about that, obedience to this law is also in our best interest. God wouldn't ask you to do something that is contrary to your best interest. And it's in that spirit that we approach the fifth commandment. The words are very, very simple, and you've heard them a million times. You see them everywhere. The 10 Commandments, you find them. Honor your father and your mother. Nothing real tricky here. You can look it up in the original Hebrew. Nothing's really hard to understand. The key notion, though, is for us to honor them. And in the original language, the basic idea is that you would treat your parents with respect, that you would offer them deference, that you would be respectful toward them because they carry the heavy weight of parenthood. And sometimes we talk about people being heavyweights, meaning they carry all of that weight. That's exactly the sense here in the Hebrew text. It means that you treat your parents special because they carried the heavy weight of parental authority. And being a parent is not easy. Anybody disagree that's a parent? Any parents in here say, no, it was a piece of cake? No hands are raised, right? It is difficult. And of course, to honor means to treat with dignity, with respect, and as I said, with deference. And so you are to honor your parents because of the heaviness of the position that they carried in being your parent. And if you're not a parent yet, then there's no way you can truly understand the weight that parents carry. The 24/7 responsibility to provide for and care for and raise up a child. A casual glance at our society today may indicate that parents have little or no authority. I mean, you look at the way that they're portrayed in media or even in films, they're kind of like lightweights. They're clueless. They don't understand anything about their kids or anything that their kids are going through. That's often how we see them. They're just, not very sharp. Kids are always getting one up on their parents. And in fact, a former vice president of the United States was caught on video a few years ago telling a huge group of high school students. He spoke at a high school, and he told them that somehow, as modern children, they actually know more than their parents do. That's a very dangerous thing to be telling kids. He said this to these high school kids, and I'm quoting. He said, "You know things, and you understand things that your parents do not. And because of that, you should not pay all that much attention to what your parents think because they just don't get it." That's nice, isn't it? That's exactly what we need, undermining parental authority, over and over and over again. But the fact remains, parents do have a special relationship with their children, and we honor them when we recognize that special position. And you need to understand this. This commandment to honor is not contingent upon how good of a parent they were or how well they performed as a parent. You may have had lousy parents. You may have had unattentive parents. Unfortunately, many children grow up with parents who are almost completely absent or abusive or cruel or unkind. Your parents may have split up when you were very young. My parents stayed together till I graduated high school, and then they split up. And that was a very, very difficult situation. One or both of your parents may have neglected you or had some kind of a substance abuse problem of their own. All of those issues will obviously affect your relationship with your parent. However, your parent's failure to be all that they should have been does not and will not excuse you from obeying this fifth commandment. It doesn't say honor your mother and father if they were great parents. It just doesn't say that. Scripture doesn't say honor your parents if they were honorable. It doesn't say honor your parents if they deserved it. It doesn't say honor your parents if they treated you fairly, if they treated you right. The fifth commandment says honor your mother and your father, period. Now, of course, the life experience that you had with your parents will certainly affect that relationship. I mean, that's just a fact. We can't ignore that. There's no denying that if you didn't have a good relationship with your parents, that it's going to be a challenge for you to do this. It will certainly affect the way that you obey this commandment and the motivation that you bring into it, or the excuse that you come up with to not obey this commandment. But it doesn't really affect the central reality that you are required by God to obey it, whether you had good parents or bad parents. My wife, when she was growing up, my wife Rosalba, she's from Mexico, and her family was in Mexico. Her mother and father had 8 children. She was one of the oldest of 8 children. And when she was about the age of 10, her parents split up. But unlike my parents that just kind of split up, her father left the scene. Her father abandoned their family, a mother and 8 children, alone in Mexico with no social safety net whatsoever. It was very, very difficult growing up for my wife. And as she became an adult, as we became faithful Christians, she began to wonder about her father, the father that had abandoned her and left her. And so when the internet came about, we were able to do research more effectively. She found out what city he was in. And she tracked him down. She knew that he was a baker by occupation, and she found him. She actually found him, and she called him, and she reached out to him. Not because he had been a good father, but because she was obeying this commandment. She wanted to preach the gospel to her father. She wanted to offer him forgiveness for abandoning her. And she established, it was painful, but she established a relationship with this father that had abandoned her for the sole purpose of trying to help save his soul. And they had conversations, many conversations, before he passed away. And she has a clear conscience, knowing that she reached out to this man and actually received some aggravation from her mom for doing so. But she did it because, in large part, we're commanded to do this. And you might find it interesting that this principle is not exclusively a Christian principle at all. The ancient Greeks, they wrote a lot about the relationships between a parent and a child. In fact, Plato, he writes that the honor that was due to parents was second only to the honor that is due to God. That's how he felt about it. He said, every honest person, he says, pays their debts, and there is no debt so primary and so essential as the universal as the debt to which every child owes to every parent for the love and the care which gave them life and preserved their life. He goes on to say, and throughout all of their life, a person must diligently observe reverence of speech toward their parents above all things. They should see to it that their parents are fittingly buried when they die, and they should forever cherish the memories of them. Again, he didn't write anything about whether or not the parents qualified, if they had been a good parent. The Jewish author Josephus, he writes virtually the same thing when he's writing about this. One passage he wrote says this: in what does reverence for a parent consist? In not setting in their presence, and in not speaking angrily in their presence, and in not contradicting them publicly. Of what does honor for parents consist? He says, in providing food and drink for them, and helping them enter and leave the house, even if a father ordered them to throw a purse of gold into the sea, the son or the daughter should obey them. I'd have to question that one. I don't know about that, but beyond this commandment, there is this universal truth. There is a special relationship, and I know this for a fact, a special relationship exists between parents and children. And that relationship is unlike any other relationship that you will have in life with anyone else. We have 3 children, and they all have official names, of course. And when I'm speaking to them, I call them by their name. But there are times when we're having an intimate conversation, or I really want to speak sweetly into their life, and I don't call them Rebecca or Adam or Daniel. I mean, that's their names. But I have special names for my kids. I have special individual names for them that only I call them, and it's based on our special relationship. And I'm not going to share them with you guys because that's between them and me. It's like the special name that my father had for me as I was growing up. There are sometimes special names between people. You have special names that indicate the intimacy of your relationship. You know that God has a special name for you? Do you know that God has a name that he will share only with you? You read all about it in Revelation chapter 2. But there's a white stone that God will give you. And there is a special name, his pet name for you, his special name for you is written on that stone. And he will give that to you at one time. But that special relationship with my kids, it comes with some responsibilities. I typically don't call them those special names when I'm angry at them, when they've disobeyed me. One of the things that I require of them is that they honor and respect me because I am their father. Back when I was a teenager, one of my very first official jobs that I got, where they took out taxes. What a shock that was. The government stole my money. But anyways, I was working for the same company that my father worked for. Actually, he got me the job. My father was one of the executives there, and he got me a job. And it consisted mostly of the kind of work you would have as a teenager, kind of janitorial work. And it was a plastic manufacturing company, and they milled and they took raw plastic and they turned it into these little intricate parts for all kinds of things. It was a company called Continental Plastics. They're still around today. They make parts for the space shuttle and NASA. I mean, it's a big company. But at the time, it was kind of small, and I worked when everyone else had gone home. My job started at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and everybody had already left or was leaving. And for most of the time that I worked, I was completely alone and on my own. And I was cleaning up. I would spray down the machines with air to get the little parts all off of them, and I'd sweep the floors. And it was just me, pretty sweet. No supervision. Cool kind of a job. And I punched in when I started. I punched out when I got done. I turned off the lights, set the alarm, and left. Took about 3 hours. It was about 3 hours of work every day. But over time, as I did this, I got faster and faster. I got to where I could really do it in less than 2 hours. But then I was losing money, see, because I liked getting paid for 3 hours, but it didn't take me 3 hours to do it anymore. And so I would finish up and I'd just kind of hang out, waiting by the clock, waiting for the time clock to tick so I could check out. One day, as I had finished work and I was just hanging around work and waiting for quitting time, and I was snooping around in some of the offices, and I found a little key in a drawer, and it had a little tag on it, and it said, time clock. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what this does. So I went to the time clock, and it opened it up, and I turned the clock ahead, and I punched it on a blank card, and I changed it back, and I punched it. I thought, yeah, I can adjust my hours. And I didn't feel like I was a thief because I was giving them the same job, the same quality job. One day I actually thought no one would notice. And so, I got done in 2 hours, and I turned the time clock ahead, and I punched out, and I turned it back and put the key back in the drawer, and I left. And I went to my girlfriend's house, and I thought, this is great. I'm still getting paid and all that. Well, it was raining that night. And for some reason, my father had never done this, but he was worried about me riding my bike home. So he came to pick me up. And I wasn't there. And he looked at my time card, and I punched out 45 minutes later, earlier. And he knew. He just knew. When I got home, he asked me about it. He was really mad. And he was hurt because he had trusted me, right? And I did something bad. But I was his son, you see. And my actions were a reflection on him as a parent. I had dishonored him with my dishonesty. I had disrespected him with my lack of respect for honesty. And so he did what any self-respecting father would do. He fired me. First time I ever got fired was by my dad. And you know what? I totally understand it. I agree with it. I would have fired me too. I mean, there was a lesson to be learned, and I didn't understand it back then, but I was dishonoring his name. And there's something in this commandment that encourages us not to dishonor our mother or our father. See, I'm still my father's son, even though he fired me. I'm still my father's son, even though he passed away many years ago. I will always be my father's son. That relationship will never change. The burden to honor his name will never be lifted from my shoulders because he is my father and I am his son. There's more to this commandment than just sentiment, though. I would be remiss if I didn't show you what God actually has to say. And a lot of these verses are from the Old Testament about what the prophets and what the law said that you should do with a child who chooses to disobey. I'm so glad that my father didn't obey the laws of the Old Testament when I got fired. But here's some of the words you might find, for example, in Exodus chapter 21:15. Anyone who strikes their father or mother must be put to death. That's pretty harsh, isn't it? Deuteronomy 21 is amazing. It gives us this long instruction. I know you can't really see it there because it's so small, but it's in Deuteronomy 21. It says this: first, the parents bring a disobedient child to the elders at the gate of the town. Second, they testify against their own child that they are stubborn, that they are rebellious, that they are reckless. Third, then all of the men in town shall gather around them and stone them to death. How horrible, right? That's harsh, isn't it? It goes on to tell us that you must purge all evil from among you, to not let their example of disobedience and rebelliousness actually spread. And God actually knows that if you destroy the family, it will destroy society, and we are all witnesses to that. I mean, we see how our culture is devolving into, want some more? Here's Proverbs. I love Proverbs, but this is Proverbs 19. Children who mistreat their father or chase away their mother are an embarrassment and a public disgrace. Another one from Proverbs chapter 20. If you insult your father or mother, your light will be snuffed out into total darkness. Proverbs 30, chapter 30, verse 17. The eye that mocks a father and despises a mother's instruction will be plucked out by the ravens of the valley and eaten by vultures. This is some really, really strong language about disrespecting your parents. These are all serious words. And what this is telling us is that this commandment needs to be taken seriously. God's not kidding around when he says, honor your father and your mother. And those who take this commandment lightly, will suffer. They will regret it. There's a reason behind all of these serious warnings, and I think that it comes down to this. You ought to honor your parents because at first, you don't remember, when you were a baby, your parents represented God's place in your life. They provided everything for you. They cared for you. They were in charge. I mean, your life depended upon them. At first, they pretty much represent God to you. And of course, they're far from perfect. I'm not saying they are God. I'm saying that relationship, that's all you know as a child, is that these parents take care of you. And even the best parent fail in so many ways. But as young children, mom and dad, they pretty much represent the provider, the creator and the provider in your life. The bottom line, this commandment matters to God because the way you respond to your parents is the way that most likely later on in life you will respond to God. Because it's modeled in that relationship. If you're hostile and angry towards your parents, you will likely be hostile and angry towards God. If you honor your parents despite their faults, you are likely to honor God in your life, even if you don't totally understand why God asks you to do certain things that you don't want to do or you don't understand or you don't agree with. And that's why this commandment is fifth on the list here. Like I said, the first three commandments, they're all about your relationship with God, right? The fourth commandment is concerning taking time for God and getting rest and relationship building and all that kind of thing. But the last six deal with your relationships exclusively with other people. And this one, honor your parents, is the one that makes it easy actually to then go on to honor all the rest of them as well. Learn to honor your parents and to truly treat them with respect, and you will probably not have many problems with things like murder or adultery or theft if you respect your parents, if they've modeled good parenthood to you. But if you don't honor your parents, you're not likely to really feel like it's necessary to honor any of the other commandments from God either, because they're all about relationships. This one sets the tone. So the fifth commandment is crucial and fundamental. Get this one down, and it'll be easier, much easier, to follow all the others. We've seen these serious warnings about neglecting this commandment, but is there anything positive, Robert? This seems kind of like a downer. Yeah, there are some positive things that you can take away from this. There are rewards to actually obeying this commandment. I can show you at least 3 reasons why I believe children should be careful to honor their mother and their father. First of all, I think it's just the right thing to do. Ephesians 6 says, "Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do." Oftentimes, people think God is very negative. God says, don't do this and don't do that. But here, God is being very positive, and he's telling you, honor your parents, obey your parents, because it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. Another thing we find is that it pleases God. In Colossians chapter 3, it says, "Children, always obey your parents, for this pleases God." Do you know that God is pleased when you honor your parents? It also leads to long life. In Exodus, it says here, "Honor your mother and your father, so that you may live long in the land of the Lord that your God is giving you." Beyond that, when you honor your parents, it just makes the family better. It makes the family more stable. I had a sister that was really, really rebellious. And I remember she ran away a number of times. She caused my parents a lot of late nights worrying and wondering. And I remember the turmoil that it disrupted in the entire family because of her behavior. She's a great lady now, wonderful lady. We get along great and everything. But at the time, she really stressed our entire family. If one child is out of sorts, it really goes on to affect the rest of the family. When families stay intact, society is strengthened. When society is strengthened, people live longer, happier lives. That's why God says, if society is functioning properly, because individual families are functioning properly, then you can expect to live more productive and happier and longer lives. And this is not just understood by God. This is something that is understood all around the world. People have known this for a long time. If you need a little bit more convincing, there was a series of tales told a number of years ago. Grimm's fairy tales. They're kind of dark. Anybody ever read Grimm's fairy? They're kind of dark. There was one I remember, and it says, once upon a time, there's this young couple, and they were forced to take in the husband's aging father. There was nobody else to take care of for him. And the young wife, she didn't want to do that. She really didn't want her father-in-law living with them, but she agreed to do it because she loved her husband. And so she told the old man, though, "We eat dinner at such and such a time, and if you want to eat, you need to be there when dinner starts." She gave him this warning: we start at this time. And so at first the old man would come on time, but eventually, sometimes he would come late, or he would forget, or he'd, be sleeping or whatever. And so to teach him a lesson, the young wife then set a small table and a chair in the corner. And when the old man would show up, she would make him sit and eat in the corner. And that went on for a little while. And after enduring this situation as long as she could, the wife was exasperated, and he began to make a mess in the corner. Just as it got harder and harder to feed himself, he'd make a mess. And so the wife said she couldn't take it anymore, and she got a small feeding trough. And she set it on the table, and she said, "This is you're going to eat like a pig, then you're going to eat out of a trough." And so that went on for a few weeks. And then one day they couldn't find their little 5-year-old boy, but they heard some hammering out in the shed behind. And they went out there and they found the little boy, and he's bam, bam, bam. He's hammering some nails into the wood. And the mom says, "What are you doing?" And he says, I'm making a trough for you when you get old, Mom." And what that tells us is, your children will treat you the way they see you treating your parents. If you're disrespectful towards your parents, they may end up thinking that that's okay to do as well. The moral of the story is your children will treat you the same way they see you treat your parents. And that's indisputable. One generation teaches the next, and our children learn to honor us precisely in the same way. If your children see you honoring your parents, then they will know that that is the way to do it as well. If you want to be remembered with kindness when you're old, treat your elderly parents with respect, whether you think they deserve it or not. It's not about their performance. So how do we apply this commandment to our lives? Well, I can think of a couple of ways, and we have to differentiate here. For children, for people with parents, if your parents are still alive, we can sum up this application like this. If you're a parent and you have children, make it easy for your children to obey this command. Make it easy for them. My wife and I, we're older now, and our kids are pretty much grown. We're at the tail end of being parents, although you're always a parent. And we're very proud of who they are and the people that they've become. But how do you make it easy for your children to honor you? Well, I'll share our parental philosophy. And the number one thing that we tried to do is when we saw good, we mentioned good. We praised them for the things they were doing well. When was the last time that you actually told your child, "I'm proud of you"? I bet not a week goes by that my kids don't hear some affirmation from me, even as adults, that I'm proud of them, that I think they're doing a good job. When was the last time you bragged about your child's performance or your child in the presence of other people? You praise in public. Nothing can take the place of praising your children. It's hard enough to be a kid, especially in today's day and age, to be a kid. You need all the support you can get, especially from your parents. Number two, I think you can make it easy on your child to respect you by listening to them. And I think a lot of fathers fail here because we're busy. When we're busy, when we're angry, when we're trying to do 8 different things at once, we tend not to listen to people. Our children talk, but often we don't listen. And that's sad. And that's something that you need to address if you're the parent of a child. Usually we spend so much time on our job that we have nothing left to give our children, and that's a sin. That is a sin. It's amazing how much wisdom you can actually discover from young people if you'll just take the time to listen to them. And all you have to do is ask. Your children will be glad to tell you what they think if you'll just sit down and ask them. Number 3, I think by setting limits and saying no. If you're a parent, you need to get this down. I read somewhere that I like it. It's a poem, but I couldn't find who wrote it. Every child needs a pat on the back from time to time. And sometimes you need to make sure that you give it low enough and hard enough. Get it? As I said, praising your children is crucial, but not as crucial as being determined to say no and being consistent with your discipline. Even more, you have to back it up. You have to be willing to back it up. There were times when we actually spanked our kids. We did, but it was far and few in between. Most of the time we could talk to them, but there are times when discipline had to be meted out, and we did that. You decide how you do this. We do it in various ways, but yeah, we did spank our kids, but they're okay. They'll tell you they didn't suffer. But I can't stress enough that if you want your children to do well, you have to be willing to be consistent. You have to set limits and enforce those limits. You have to start when they're very young too. You really, really do. The spiritual law of sowing and reaping, you can actually watch this in child rearing in almost better than almost anything else in life. If you wait till your child is 10 or 12 years old to start instilling discipline, you're not going to like the results, because by then they're pretty set in their ways. So you have to start young, but you need to listen to them too. And number 4, by spending time with them. Nothing can take the place of spending time with your children. No gift you can give them is as important as time with you. They'll forget the things you give them. The things that you give them will break and get thrown away, but they'll never forget the time that you spent with them. And I'm going to be honest with you. You have one chance. Listen to me. If you're a parent with children, you have one chance to raise that child. And sacrificing that responsibility for the sake of your career or your success is no excuse. It just isn't. And the last thing that I think you can do to make it easy for your children to honor you is modeling life to them. Our children, they're going to copy everything that you do. They really, really are. And that's a terrifying part of parenthood. You've heard it said, your children can't hear the words that you're saying because your actions speak so loudly. I mean, kids are not dumb, and they'll see what you do. Years ago, there was a little poem, and it summed it up with some clarity and some power, and it was this. It said, there are little eyes upon you, and they're watching night and day. There are little ears that quickly take in every word that you say. There are little hands eager to do anything you do, and a little boy or girl who's dreaming of the day that they'll be just like you. You are setting an example every day in all that you do. For that little boy, that little girl who's watching will grow up to be just like you. That is the heavy weight of parenthood. That is the burden that we bear. I'm always brought to tears on Father's Day because my kids, of course, will give me Father's Day cards. And it's not just the cards, though. It's the words that they write in these cards that take me to my knees. Words like, Dad, you're the best dad ever. Dad, I learned so much from you. Dad, you've been my example. Dad, I want to be just like you. I mean, those things, those words obviously fill me with joy and amazement and fear. Yeah, fear that somehow they might imitate my failures, that somehow I won't meet their expectation. The fear that in some ways they see me as a hero and they're going to imitate me in life. Is there any greater honor or reward in the world than the love of your children, the admiration and the respect of your children? Let's talk about grown-up children, because most of us are grown-up, though, and this is how it applies to us. If you're a grown-up, the fact is God never intended that this commandment was primarily aimed at little kids. When we first read honor your mother and father, we think this is directed at little kids, but it's not. This commandment, after all, how many young kids were there present at the foot of Mount Sinai? When they came out of Egypt, a lot of them were adults. Yes, there were children there, but most of the people who received the Ten Commandments were adults. The commandments are speaking primarily to grown-up children. And so when we interpret this commandment, you need to understand, if you're an adult, this is speaking to you, not just your children. This is telling people how to treat their parents. How do we apply this commandment to our lives with our adult parents, and we're adults? If this seems familiar to you, it's because it's almost identical, a little different, but how can we honor our parents when we are no longer, we no longer live under their roof or under their authority? I tell my kids all the time, I'll be your parent forever. It's just that now you don't have to do what I say. There was a time where they had to do what I say. It was much simpler, but we don't live they get to decide now. So how can you honor your parents? How can you honor your parents by living out this commandment as an adult with adult older parents? Well, kind of the same thing, by praising them. Sometimes I hear adults say terrible and disrespectful things about their parents because their parents are getting older, and they speak with bitterness or they speak with anger because of things that happened many, many years ago. You'll never hear my wife talking angrily or bitterly about her father. When she focuses on that relationship with him, she focuses on the end, the relationship they had at the end of his life. But this raises a question: how do you speak well of people who have hurt you deeply? How do you do that? How many of us have had, a less than healthy relationship maybe with our parents for various reasons, and I want to acknowledge that. I know that is the situation. I know it's a fact, but here we're left with some advice that we've learned a long time ago, and it was good advice when you heard it the first time. If you can't say anything nice, just don't say anything. That's a step up from saying something bad. It's just not say anything. We might even don't add it on social media either. Don't rag on your parents, because they're not part of Facebook or whatever. There is a true sense in which you can honor your parents by simply not speaking evil about them. That would be honoring them, because something inside of you wants to lash out, but you don't. Speak well of your parents if you can, and if you can't, then refuse to speak evil about them. At least do that. That would be honoring them in some way. This is a way of honoring your parents, even if you had a horrible, strained relationship with them. Also, by listening to them. I think you need to listen to your parents. I know that as soon as I say that, a lot of you guys are saying, well, the whole point of moving away from my parents was so I wouldn't have to listen to them anymore. And that may be true. Maybe you don't want to listen to them, and you've heard them say it over and over. We've heard it said, over and over and over again. They told the story. Listen one more time. Give them the respect to listen one more time. Most of us have heard it said that while you don't have to obey your parents, you still have to listen to them, and you should. I think that's a way of honoring them. But it doesn't really grasp the full biblical implications of the fifth commandment. Our modern attitude of moving away so we don't have to listen or obey our parents would be shocked by Moses and Paul. Both of them would be shocked by this. It's pretty clear reading the Bible that children are always to listen to their parents. You don't necessarily have to obey anymore, but you have to listen. The only possible exception being when the parent asks the children to do something that is against the word of God. If your parent asks you to sin, certainly you don't have to do that, right? But in the biblical mindset, the older your parents got, the more wisdom they would have over time. Now, it's not in every case that as people get older, they get wiser. But generally, that's true. I would say that's generally true because life experience does make you wiser. You attain greater abilities to understand some things. And so with age does come some wisdom. Does that mean that a grown-up child should always obey their elderly parents? I don't think so. I don't think that's what this is saying at all. But you should at least be willing to listen to them. That's a big part of it. Even if you've heard it 100 times, honor your parents by listening one more time. In God's eyes, we are forever our parents' children. And it extended the entire life, not just till you were 18, not just till you moved out of the house. Always under obligation to honor your parents as far as possible. That's kind of what God is asking you to do. And 3, by spending time with them. I honestly, as adults with your own lives and your own responsibilities, a lot of times people neglect spending time with their parents. I know I did. And I regret it. They're gone now. And I regret the years that went by without me spending time with them. I wish I could change that. And here we come to the heart of the problem for many people. How do you honor your parents when they're gone? How do you honor your parents when they were abusive? How do you honor an alcoholic father? How do you honor a mother that abandoned you? How do you honor parents that neglected you? This is a very, very difficult thing that you're asking. Here's the simple answer. We must not use the hurts from our past to excuse or try to evade the responsibility of this commandment. There's no ifs in here. It doesn't say honor your mother and father if they were good parents. We must not conclude that, my parents were not lovable, therefore I will not love them. That's not an excuse. My parents were not wise, therefore I will not respect them. My parents were not kind, therefore I don't feel obligated to honor them. My parents were not patient, therefore I am not patient with them. My parents weren't there for me, so I'm not going to be there for them. I'm not sure that God would smile on that logic. So many of us, we waste years kind of playing the if-only game, like if only my father had loved me, if only my mother had been more kind or supportive, if only my parents had stayed together. This if-only game, though, it's destructive because it teaches you that life would be better in some kind of fantasy world. You'll make a major advance in your spiritual life when you realize that your parents are sinners. Let's just go ahead and admit that. Your parents are sinners, and you as a parent, you are a sinner. All of us are. Are your parents unlovely? Love them anyways. Are your parents selfish? Love them anyways. Are they possessive? Love them anyways. Are they too old, too contrary, too weak, too mean, too silly, too hard, too foolish? Doesn't matter what they are. You love them anyways. They're still your parents. Take time to nurture that relationship because you can heal some relationships. I can tell you this, parents never get tired of having their children come home and spend time with them. We never do. We never regret the time that we spend with our adult children. And number 4, this is an important one. How do you respect your parents? By modeling life to them. Appreciating and embracing the values and the traditions that they have passed on to you. That is one of the most honorable things that you can do for your parents. When it's done right, your children will become your legacy. Your mom and dad, you are their legacy, and you carry on the good things, and you pass on the good things. And when you're doing that, when you become a legacy, when you see your children modeling the life that you taught them to, you model that to them. It's such a special thing. Regardless of whether you had a great childhood or a lousy childhood, we should all be able to extract something positive about the fact that our parents gave us life. You wouldn't be here without them. None of us would. You should be able to at least extract some positive aspect and embrace that. This is a great way of honoring your parents. Or we could say, at least don't neglect them or reject the things that they stand for because they don't line up with the things that you stand for. Don't dishonor them. This is really what this is getting to. I think about Jesus, and if you remember when he was hanging on the cross, going through everything that he had been through, the scourging and the beating and the mocking and the carrying his cross, and he's nailed up to the cross, and he looks down and he sees his mother, and he says, "Woman, behold your son." And he looks over at John, and he says to John, "Son, behold your mother." I mean, think about that. Well, he's dying for the sins of the world, but he took the time to keep the 5th commandment. It was on his mind to honor his mother. At the beginning of this message, I said that this commandment is one that helps you obey the rest. And I think that's because this is a place where you can demonstrate the reality of your faith. This is a place where you get to say, this is how I choose to live out my faith. And you can demonstrate the reality of your religion in your home, in each one of our homes. We're going to worship together. We're going to